I'm Sarah, 28, and I thought I knew what family loyalty meant until last Thanksgiving when my parents blocked me at their front door and told me I wasn't welcome. What I discovered that day about my so-called loving family would make your blood boil. The lies, the manipulation, the stolen inheritance, it all came crashing down in one devastating moment. But here's the thing about karma, it always finds a way to balance the scales, and my revenge? Let's just say it was sweeter than any pumpkin pie. What do you think happened when I finally got my revenge? Drop your predictions in the comments below. And if you love family drama stories where justice gets served ice cold, smash that like button and subscribe because this story has more twists than a pretzel factory. Trust me, you won't see this ending coming. Growing up, everyone in our small town of Millbrook thought the Hendersons were the perfect family. My parents, Robert and Patricia Henderson, owned the largest accounting firm in town, lived in the biggest house on Maple Street, and never missed a charity event or church service. From the outside, we had it all: money, respect, and what everyone assumed was an unbreakable family bond. I was their golden child, or so I thought. Straight A's through high school, full scholarship to Northwestern for my business degree, and I'd even started my own successful marketing consultancy by age 26. My younger brother Jake, 25, was the family rebel, dropped out of college, bounced between jobs, and had a gambling problem that my parents constantly bailed him out of. Despite his issues, they always insisted that family comes first and that we'd always have each other's backs no matter what. The family dynamic seemed clear: I was the responsible one who made them proud, Jake was the screw-up they loved unconditionally, and together we were the next generation of Henderson success. Every holiday, every family gathering, every Sunday dinner reinforced this narrative. My parents would beam with pride when introducing me to their friends, talking about my achievements and how I was just like them, driven, successful, and family-oriented. But there were always little things that didn't quite add up. Hushed conversations that stopped when I entered rooms. Financial documents my father would quickly shuffle away when I visited his home office. The way my mother's smile would sometimes falter when she looked at me, as if she was remembering something painful. I chalked it up to normal family quirks, maybe stress from work or worry about Jake's latest mess. My relationship with money was always complicated in our house. Despite their wealth, my parents were oddly stingy with me once I became an adult. They'd paid for my college, sure, but after graduation, they expected me to be completely financially independent. "You're capable enough to make it on your own," my father would say. Meanwhile, Jake got his rent paid, his debts cleared, and a monthly allowance well into his 20s. When I questioned this disparity, they'd get defensive and say I was jealous and ungrateful. The inheritance conversations were equally strange. My parents had always been secretive about their will, but they'd occasionally mention that everything would be fair and that blood is thicker than water. I assumed this meant Jake and I would split everything equally, despite his financial irresponsibility. After all, that's what family meant, right? Taking care of each other, especially your children, no matter what. Looking back now, I can see all the red flags I missed. The way my father's business partner, Uncle Tom, not actually related, just a family friend, would give me sympathetic looks during family gatherings. How my grandmother on my mother's side would sometimes tear up when she looked at me and mutter things in Italian that I couldn't understand. The fact that I looked nothing like either of my parents, my dark hair and olive skin contrasting sharply with their blonde, fair features. "You got the recessive genes," my mother would explain with a laugh that never quite reached her eyes. I trusted them completely. They were my parents, my foundation, the people who had raised me and supposedly loved me unconditionally. When friends would complain about family drama or unfair treatment, I'd feel grateful for my stable, successful family. "I'm so lucky," I'd tell myself. My parents really have their act together. The irony of that statement now makes me physically ill. Thanksgiving 2023 started like any other. I'd spent weeks preparing, buying expensive wine for dinner, getting the perfect hostess gift for my mother, and mentally preparing for what I assumed would be our usual family gathering. I'd even taken a half day off work to help with preparations, something I'd done every year since moving back to Millbrook after college. I pulled into the familiar circular driveway at exactly 2 p.m., the time my mother had specifically requested. The house looked picture-perfect as always, fall decorations tastefully arranged, the lawn manicured to country club standards, warm light glowing from the windows. I could smell the turkey and stuffing from outside, and I remember feeling that familiar warmth of coming home for the holidays. But something was wrong the moment I rang the doorbell. Usually, my parents would just yell "come in," but this time, I heard footsteps approaching. Both my father and mother came to the door, and their expressions weren't welcoming. They weren't smiling. They looked nervous? Guilty? At the time, I couldn't quite place the emotion, but it definitely wasn't holiday joy. "Sarah," my father said stiffly, not moving aside to let me enter. "We need to talk." "Okay," I laughed, still holding my wine and gift bag. "Can we talk inside? It's freezing out here." That's when my mother dropped the bomb. "Actually, honey, you're not invited to dinner today." The words hit me like a physical blow. I actually stepped backward, sure I'd misheard. "What do you mean I'm not invited?" "It's Thanksgiving. It's family dinner." My father cleared his throat, and I could see Jake hovering in the background, looking uncomfortable but not surprised. This had been planned. They'd discussed this without me. "We've decided it's best if you don't join us today. There are some family matters we need to discuss privately." "Family matters?" I felt my voice rising. "I am family." "What family matters could you possibly need to discuss that don't include me?" The silence stretched on forever. My mother was crying now, but she still didn't invite me in. My father was staring at his shoes. Jake had disappeared entirely. The neighbors' houses suddenly felt very close, and I was acutely aware that this humiliating conversation was happening on their front porch for anyone to see. "Please," I tried one more time, my voice breaking. "Just tell me what's going on. Whatever I did, we can fix it. Can't we just have dinner and talk about it like a family?" My father finally looked up, and the expression on his face was one I'd never seen before. Cold. Distant. Like he was looking at a stranger. "Sarah, there are things you don't understand about this family. Things that are complicated. We think it's better if you spend today with friends or somewhere else." The dismissal was clear. After 28 years of family Thanksgivings, of helping cook and clean and play the perfect daughter, they were literally shutting the door in my face. I stood there for another few seconds, waiting for someone to say just kidding or surprise. But it never came. "Fine," I managed to say, though my hands were shaking so badly I nearly dropped the wine. "I guess I know where I stand now." I turned to leave, but not before I heard my mother whisper to my father, "This is harder than we thought it would be." Harder for them? They weren't the ones being abandoned on a holiday by the people they loved most. The drive home was a blur of tears and confusion. I kept replaying the conversation, looking for clues I might have missed. Had I done something wrong? Forgotten an important event? Said something offensive? But no matter how hard I thought, I couldn't come up with any reason why my own parents would ban me from family dinner. That night, I called every family friend I could think of, trying to piece together what might have happened. Most of them were awkward and evasive, clearly knowing something I didn't. But Mrs. Patterson, our next-door neighbor for 20 years, finally gave me a clue that would change everything. "Honey," she said carefully, "have you ever asked your parents about your adoption papers?" The word adoption hit me like a sledgehammer. I actually dropped the phone and had to pick it up with shaking hands. "What adoption papers?" "Mrs. Patterson, what are you talking about?" Her silence told me everything I needed to know. She'd assumed I knew. After a long pause, she spoke quietly, "Oh sweetie, I'm so sorry. I thought, after all these years. I assumed they'd told you by now." The next few hours were a blur of frantic phone calls, desperate Googling, and a growing sense of dread that everything I'd believed about my life was a lie. Mrs. Patterson, bless her heart, met me at a coffee shop that evening and told me what she knew. The Hendersons had adopted me when I was just 3 days old. It had been a closed adoption, and they'd moved to Millbrook specifically to start fresh where nobody knew their business. Your biological mother was very young, Mrs. Patterson explained gently. From what I understood, she was from a wealthy family in Chicago, and they wanted the whole thing kept quiet. Your parents paid a lot of money for that privacy. But here's where the story gets really twisted. Mrs. Patterson remembered overhearing conversations between my parents and their lawyer over the years. The adoption had come with unusual stipulations. My biological family had set up a trust fund, a substantial one, that was supposed to be mine when I turned 25. The Hendersons were supposed to be the trustees until then, but they were never supposed to touch the money. I always wondered why you didn't seem to know about it, she said. When you turned 25 and were still struggling to build your business, still living in that tiny apartment. I thought maybe you were just being modest about your inheritance. My inheritance. Money that was rightfully mine, that I'd never even known existed. Money that could have helped me start my business years earlier, buy a house, maybe even help some friends and charities I cared about. Money that my parents had been sitting on for 3 years while watching me work 60-hour weeks to build my consultancy from nothing. That night, I barely slept. I spent hours online, researching Illinois adoption laws, trust funds, and legal rights of adult adoptees. What I learned made me sick to my stomach. In many cases, adopted children have the right to access information about their biological families and any financial arrangements made during the adoption process. If there was indeed a trust fund, and if the Hendersons had been hiding it from me, that could constitute fraud. The next morning, I made 2 phone calls that would change my life forever. First, I called a lawyer who specialized in adoption cases. Second, I called in sick to work and drove to the county courthouse to start requesting every document I could get my hands on. The lawyer, Jennifer Martinez, was exactly what I needed, sharp, experienced, and furious on my behalf when she heard my story. If what you're telling me is true, she said during our consultation, we're not just talking about hidden inheritance. We're talking about breach of fiduciary duty, potentially fraud, and emotional damages that could be substantial. At the courthouse, the clerk was sympathetic but explained that sealed adoption records would require a court order. However, she could provide me with basic information about legal documents filed in my name. That's when I discovered something that made my blood run cold. There were trust fund disbursement documents filed just 2 months earlier, in September 2023. Someone had been taking money out of my trust fund recently. Large amounts. And the signatures on the withdrawal authorizations were from Robert and Patricia Henderson. I sat in my car in the courthouse parking lot, staring at the papers and trying to process what I was seeing. Not only had my parents hidden my adoption from me for 28 years, not only had they kept my inheritance secret, but they'd been actively stealing from it. The timing was particularly gut-wrenching. They'd taken a large withdrawal just weeks before banning me from Thanksgiving dinner. The pieces were starting to come together, but I needed more information. That's when I remembered Jake's gambling debts, his mysterious monthly allowance, the fact that he'd seemed unusually flush lately. Had they been using MY money to fund his lifestyle? Had my own trust fund been bankrolling the brother who'd always been treated like the favorite while I was treated like an outsider? That evening, I made a decision that would set everything in motion. I was going to find out exactly how much money we were talking about, how long this had been going on, and what other lies my family had been telling. But more than that, I was going to make sure justice was served. I called Jennifer Martinez back and told her to start the legal process immediately. I want every document unsealed, I told her. I want a full accounting of every penny that's been moved in and out of that trust. And I want to know who my biological family is. This could get ugly, she warned me. Family legal battles always do. Good, I replied, and I meant it. They made it ugly the moment they decided to lie to me for 28 years and steal my money. Now it's time for them to face the consequences. As I hung up the phone, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months, a sense of purpose. The hurt and confusion were still there, but underneath it all was a burning determination to expose the truth and reclaim what was rightfully mine. My fake family had underestimated me my entire life. They were about to learn just how big a mistake that was. Part 5, The Investigation Deepens. The next few weeks were like living in a detective novel, except the criminals were the people who'd raised me and claimed to love me. Jennifer Martinez worked with the speed and precision of someone who'd seen this kind of family betrayal before, and each new piece of evidence we uncovered made the situation more horrific. The trust fund was massive, $2.8 million, set up by my biological grandmother who'd passed away when I was 15. The original terms were crystal clear. The money was to be held in trust until I turned 25, at which point I should have been informed of its existence and given full control. The Hendersons were meant to be temporary trustees, with a modest yearly fee for their services. Instead, they'd been treating it like their personal piggy bank. Over the past 3 years, they'd withdrawn nearly $400,000. Jake's gambling debts, his rent, his car payments, all funded by my inheritance. But that wasn't even the worst part. They'd also used my money to pay for home renovations, a luxury vacation to Europe, and, this one really stung, Patricia's cosmetic surgery. My own mother had gotten a facelift with money that was meant to secure my future. The paper trail is damning, Jennifer explained during one of our meetings. They've been in clear violation of their fiduciary duty for years. But Sarah, there's something else you need to know about your biological family. She slid a folder across her desk, and my hands trembled as I opened it. Inside were documents that would reshape my entire understanding of who I was and where I came from. My biological mother hadn't been some scared teenager like I'd imagined. She'd been 22, a graduate student from one of Chicago's most prominent families. The Morettis, a name I recognized from newspaper society pages and philanthropy events. Your biological mother is Isabella Moretti Chong, Jennifer continued. She's now a successful pediatric surgeon in Chicago. She never forgot about you, Sarah. In fact, she's been asking the adoption agency for updates for years, but the sealed records prevented any contact. My heart was racing. I had a biological mother who was not only alive but successful and had been thinking about me. But there was more. The trust fund hadn't been set up out of guilt or obligation, it had been set up by a family who genuinely wanted to ensure I had opportunities and security, even though they couldn't raise me themselves. Why couldn't she keep me? I asked, though I wasn't sure I was ready for the answer. Jennifer's expression softened. From what I can piece together from the records, it was complicated. She was young, unmarried, and her family was very traditional. But the amount of money they put aside for you, the specific terms of the trust, this wasn't abandonment, Sarah. This was love expressed the only way they knew how at the time. I spent that night crying, not just from sadness, but from a complicated mix of grief, anger, and something that might have been relief. I had another family out there, a biological mother who'd cared enough to ensure my future. Meanwhile, the people I'd called mom and dad had been systematically betraying that care and stealing from me for years. The legal strategy was becoming clear. We weren't just going after the stolen money, we were pursuing full restitution, damages for emotional distress, and criminal referrals for fraud. Jennifer was confident we had an ironclad case, but she wanted to give the Hendersons one chance to make things right before we went nuclear. Sometimes families can work these things out, she said, though her tone suggested she didn't have much hope in this case. I laughed bitterly. Jennifer, they banned me from Thanksgiving dinner rather than tell me the truth. These people aren't interested in working anything out. They're interested in continuing to lie and steal until they get caught. That's when we came up with the plan that would give me the revenge I'd been craving. Instead of just filing lawsuits and letting lawyers handle everything, we decided to confront them directly, but with backup. Jennifer would be there, along with a process server and detailed documentation of every fraudulent transaction. We'd give them exactly one opportunity to confess everything and agree to full restitution. If they refused, the legal consequences would be swift and severe. But first, I wanted to do something that felt symbolically important. I wanted to contact my biological mother. Jennifer helped me craft a letter that was forwarded through the adoption agency, a simple introduction explaining who I was and that I'd recently learned the truth about my adoption. I wasn't asking for anything from her, just letting her know that I existed and that I was okay. Her response came faster than I'd expected, and it was everything I'd hoped for. Dr. Isabella Moretti-Chung wrote that she'd thought about me every day for 28 years, that she'd wondered what kind of person I'd become, and that she'd always hoped I was happy and loved. She included photos of herself, and the resemblance was unmistakable. We had the same dark eyes, the same smile, even similar hands. "I've never stopped hoping that someday you might want to meet me," she wrote. "I understand if you're not ready for that, but please know that you have a family here in Chicago who has always loved you, even from a distance." Reading that letter while sitting in my tiny apartment, the apartment I'd been living in because I couldn't afford anything better while my trust fund was being looted, crystallized everything for me. I had been loved. I had been wanted. I had been provided for by people who cared about my future. The Hendersons had stolen not just my money, but my connection to my real family, my sense of identity, and 28 years of truth. They were about to learn that some betrayals have consequences that last a lifetime. I called Jennifer and told her it was time to move forward with confronting them. But I also had one additional request that would make this revenge even sweeter. I wanted my biological mother to be part of the confrontation. I wanted the Hendersons to meet the woman whose love and generosity they'd been betraying for years. Dr. Moretti-Chung agreed immediately. "I've been waiting 28 years to make sure you're okay," she said during our first phone call. "If these people have been hurting you and stealing from you, then yes, I absolutely want to be there when they're held accountable." The stage was set for a confrontation that would expose decades of lies and deliver the justice I'd been craving. My fake family was about to learn that their adopted daughter had grown up to be someone they definitely didn't want to mess with. Planning the confrontation felt like organizing the most important business presentation of my life, except the stakes were personal and the outcome would determine whether justice was served or my fake family continued to get away with nearly 3 decades of lies and theft. Jennifer Martinez and I spent hours strategizing every detail, from the legal documents we'd need to the exact sequence of revelations that would have maximum impact. Dr. Isabella Moretti-Chung arrived in Millbrook 2 days before our planned confrontation, and meeting her for the first time was simultaneously the most natural and most surreal experience of my life. She was staying at the Millbrook Inn, and when I walked into the lobby and saw her sitting there, it was like looking into a mirror that showed me what I'd look like in 20 years. Same dark hair, though hers was elegantly streaked with silver, same olive skin, same way of holding her shoulders when she was nervous. "Sarah," she said, standing up with tears already streaming down her face. "My God, you're beautiful." We talked for 6 hours straight that first meeting. She told me about the family I'd never known, grandparents who'd passed away still wondering about their secret granddaughter, cousins who'd grown up hearing whispered stories about Isabella's baby but never knowing details. She'd become a doctor partly because she'd always wondered if I might need medical help someday and she wanted to be able to provide it. She'd never married, though she'd had relationships, because she said no one understood why she couldn't just move on from a child she'd given up. "I didn't give you up," she explained, gripping my hands across the table. "I placed you with people I trusted to love you and give you opportunities one couldn't provide at 22. The trust fund was my way of making sure you'd always have choices, always have security. When I learned what they'd done..." Her voice trailed off, but her eyes hardened in a way that reminded me exactly where I'd gotten my stubborn streak. The plan was elegantly simple. We'd arrive at the Hendersons' house on Sunday afternoon, when we knew they'd be home and Jake would likely be there too. Jennifer would serve them with legal papers demanding full accounting of the trust fund and immediate restitution. I would confront them about the lies and the money. And then, as the final reveal, I'd introduce them to the biological mother whose generosity they'd been betraying for years. I want them to look Dr. Moretti Chung in the eye, I told Jennifer, and explain how they justified stealing from her daughter. But we also had backup plans. If they refused to cooperate, we'd file criminal charges for fraud within 24 hours. If they tried to claim the trust fund didn't exist or the withdrawals were legitimate, we had bank records and legal documents proving otherwise. If they tried to manipulate me emotionally or claim they'd done their best as parents, I had 28 years of lies and a Thanksgiving dinner exclusion to prove exactly what their love was worth. The night before the confrontation, Isabella and I had dinner at a quiet restaurant outside of town, and she gave me something that made me cry harder than I had since this whole nightmare began. It was a jewelry box, worn around the edges, with a small silver locket inside. "I bought this the day you were born," she said softly. "I was going to give it to you if I kept you, but when I made the decision to place you for adoption, I couldn't bear to part with it. I've carried it with me for 28 years, waiting for this moment." Inside the locket was a tiny photo of me as a newborn, and on the other side, an engraving, "For Sarah, with love that never ends, Mama I." "You named me Sarah?" I asked, touching the engraving with shaking fingers. "Sarah Isabella," she nodded. "I wanted you to have a piece of me, even if you never knew it." When the Hendersons told the agency they planned to keep the name Sarah, I was so happy. It felt like a sign that we were connected somehow. That night, I barely slept, but it wasn't from anxiety. It was from anticipation. For the first time in weeks, I felt like I had all the pieces of the puzzle. I knew who I really was, I knew what had been stolen from me, and I knew exactly how I was going to get justice. The scared, confused woman who'd been turned away from Thanksgiving dinner was gone. In her place was someone who knew her worth and wasn't going to accept anything less than complete accountability. The morning of the confrontation, I got dressed carefully, professional but not intimidating, confident but not arrogant. I wore the silver locket Isabella had given me, and every time I touched it, I remembered that I wasn't fighting this battle alone. I had a mother who'd loved me from day one, lawyers who believed in my case, and documentation that would expose every lie the Hendersons had told. As I drove to what I'd always called home, I felt a strange sense of closure settling over me. After today, nothing would ever be the same. The fake family dynamic, the lies, the financial theft, all of it would be out in the open. Whatever happened next, at least there would finally be truth. I parked across the street from the house where I'd grown up, and for a moment, I let myself feel the full weight of what I was about to do. I was about to destroy the only family I'd ever known. But then I remembered that they'd destroyed me first, systematically and deliberately, for years. They'd made their choices. Now they'd have to live with the consequences. Jennifer and Isabella pulled up behind me, and as we walked up that familiar driveway together, I felt powerful in a way I'd never experienced before. I had the truth, I had the law on my side, and I had a real family member standing beside me. The Hendersons were about to learn that their adopted daughter had grown up to be someone who wouldn't be dismissed, deceived, or stolen from. It was time for the reckoning they'd been avoiding for 28 years. The doorbell rang at exactly 2 p.m., the same time I'd arrived for that disastrous Thanksgiving dinner just 3 weeks earlier. This time, when Robert Henderson opened the door, his expression went from annoyed confusion to pure terror in about 2 seconds. He could see me, obviously, but behind me were 2 women he didn't recognize and a professional-looking man carrying a briefcase. "Sarah, what's going on here?" he stammered, and I could hear Patricia calling from the kitchen, asking who was at the door. "Hello, Dad," I said, letting the word drip with all the sarcasm I could muster. "These are my lawyer Jennifer Martinez, my biological mother Dr. Isabella Moretti Chung, and a process server. We're here to discuss some family matters. You know, the kind you said I wasn't invited to hear about at Thanksgiving." The color drained from his face so fast I thought he might faint. Patricia appeared behind him, took one look at our group, and I watched her make the connection immediately. She'd always been the smarter one, and seeing Isabella, who looked so obviously like me, standing there in her expensive coat with her confident posture, Patricia knew exactly what was happening. "Oh my God," she whispered. Oh my God, Robert, they know. Yes, I said, stepping forward. We know. We know about the adoption, we know about the trust fund, and we know about the $400,000 you've stolen from me over the past 3 years. Are you going to invite us in, or should we have this conversation on your front porch where all the neighbors can hear? They reluctantly stepped aside, and we filed into the living room where I'd spent countless Christmases and birthday parties, never knowing I was living a complete lie. Jake was there too, lounging on the couch with his laptop, and when he saw our group, he had the good sense to look ashamed. Jennifer took charge immediately, her voice crisp and professional. Mr. and Mrs. Henderson, I'm serving you with legal papers demanding a full accounting of the trust fund established for Sarah Moretti, also known as Sarah Henderson, along with immediate restitution of all funds improperly withdrawn. Moretti? Patricia gasped, looking back and forth between Isabella and me. But we were told, the agency said the records were sealed permanently. The records were sealed, Isabella spoke for the first time, and her voice was steady but furious. They weren't destroyed. And when you commit fraud against a trust fund, those records become very relevant to legal proceedings. I watched Robert and Patricia exchange panicked glances, and I could practically see them trying to figure out how to spin this, how to minimize it, how to make themselves the victims somehow. It was pathetic. Sarah, honey, Patricia started, using the fake motherly tone that had worked on me for 28 years, we can explain everything. We were going to tell you. Stop. I held up my hand. Just stop. You've had 28 years to tell me, and instead, you chose to lie to my face every single day. You banned me from Thanksgiving dinner rather than tell me the truth. You've stolen nearly $500,000 from me. You don't get to honey me anymore. Jake finally spoke up, his voice small and guilty. Sarah, I didn't know where the money was coming from. They said it was their money, from the business. Bullshit, Jake. I turned on him with years of accumulated frustration. You're 25 years old. You think our parents' accounting firm generates enough profit to cover your gambling debts, your rent, your car payments, and fund their luxury lifestyle? You knew something was wrong, you just didn't care because you were benefiting from it. Jennifer pulled out her documentation and spread it across the coffee table like she was dealing cards. Bank records, trust documents, withdrawal authorizations, everything laid out in black and white. The trust fund was established with $2.8 million, she announced to the room. Sarah should have been informed of its existence and given control on her 25th birthday. Instead, you've withdrawn $387,000 over the past 3 years, with the largest withdrawals coinciding with Jake's gambling debts and your personal expenses. Isabella stepped closer to Robert and Patricia, and when she spoke, her voice was deadly quiet. I trusted you with the most important thing in my world. I gave you my daughter because I believed you would love her and protect her. Instead, you've lied to her, stolen from her, and tried to cut her off from her real family. How do you justify that? Patricia started crying, but they weren't tears of remorse, they were tears of self-pity and panic. We did love her. We raised her, we paid for her education. With her money. Isabella's composure finally cracked. You paid for her education with money that was already hers. You didn't give her anything, you managed her inheritance, badly, and then you stole from it. Robert tried a different approach, the one I'd seen him use in business when he was caught making mistakes. Look, there were administrative costs, management fees. The trust fund documents allow for reasonable expenses. Jennifer laughed, actually laughed. Mr. Henderson, I've reviewed every word of the trust documents. Management fees are capped at 2% annually. You've taken nearly 15% of the total fund. Your wife's cosmetic surgery is not a reasonable administrative expense. The room went dead silent. Patricia's hand went instinctively to her face, and Jake looked genuinely shocked. Even he hadn't known about that particular use of my money. You got a facelift with my inheritance? I asked, my voice dangerously quiet. You literally used money that was meant to secure my future to make yourself look younger? Sarah, it wasn't like that. Then what was it like, Mom? I let the word turn bitter in my mouth. Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like you've been treating me like an ATM for 3 years while making me feel guilty for not being more grateful for your sacrifices. Isabella moved to stand beside me, and I felt her hand briefly touch my shoulder. Sarah, you don't have to do this alone. That simple gesture, that acknowledgement that I had someone in my corner, gave me the strength to deliver the final blow. Here's what's going to happen, I announced, looking each of them in the eye. You're going to return every penny you've stolen, with interest. You're going to transfer the remaining trust fund assets to an account under my control immediately. And you're going to sign sworn affidavits admitting to exactly what you've done and why. And if we refuse? Robert asked, though his voice suggested he already knew the answer. Jennifer smiled grimly. Then we file criminal fraud charges tomorrow morning, and this becomes a matter of public record. Your accounting firm, your reputation in this town, your standing at church, all of it becomes part of a criminal investigation. Plus, we'll be seeking punitive damages that could triple the amount you owe. The defeat on their faces was complete. They knew they were caught, they knew they had no legal recourse, and they knew their lies had finally come home to roost. But I wasn't done yet. I had one more surprise that would make this victory complete. Oh, and one more thing, I said, standing up and straightening my shoulders. Isabella has invited me to spend Christmas with her family in Chicago. My real family. So don't bother sending me a card this year. As we walked out of that house for the last time, leaving behind signed confessions and a family that had never really been mine anyway, I felt lighter than I had in months. Justice wasn't just served, it was served with a side of poetic irony that would have made Shakespeare proud. 6 months later, as I'm writing this story, my life is completely transformed in ways I never could have imagined. The legal proceedings moved faster than even Jennifer expected, partly because the Hendersons' own lawyer advised them to cooperate fully rather than face criminal charges. Within 60 days, I had complete control of my trust fund, all $2.4 million that remained, plus $400,000 in restitution, plus interest and legal fees. But the money, while life-changing, wasn't even the best part of this whole experience. The best part was discovering that I had a real family who'd been thinking about me and loving me from a distance for 28 years. Christmas with the Moretti-Chong family was everything I'd dreamed family holidays could be. Isabella's parents, my grandparents, were still alive and sharp as tacks at 78 and 82. They cried when they met me, not from sadness but from pure joy. We never stopped hoping, my grandmother said, holding my face in her weathered hands. We never stopped believing we'd see you again. I have 3 cousins who welcomed me like I'd just been away at college for a few years instead of missing for nearly 3 decades. Isabella's brother Marco owns a successful restaurant chain, and her sister Sophia is a federal judge. They're accomplished, warm, funny people who argue about politics over dinner and tease each other mercilessly, exactly the kind of authentic family dynamic I'd always craved but never experienced with the Hendersons. The Hendersons, meanwhile, faced consequences that went far beyond just paying me back. Word spread quickly in Millbrook, small towns love gossip, especially when it involves the perfect family being exposed as frauds. Their accounting firm lost several major clients who didn't want to be associated with people who'd embezzled from their own daughter. Patricia had to resign from her position on the hospital board. Robert lost his spot on the country club's board of directors. Jake actually reached out to me in February, wanting to apologize and make things right. I met him for coffee, more out of curiosity than any desire to reconcile. He looked terrible, hollow-eyed and stressed, probably because his free ride had ended abruptly when I reclaimed my money. "I'm sorry, Sarah," he said, though he couldn't quite meet my eyes. "I really didn't know it was your money at first. By the time I figured it out, I was in too deep with the gambling debts. I was scared to stop taking their help." "You know what, Jake?" I replied, stirring my latte calmly. "I actually believe that you're sorry. But being sorry doesn't undo 28 years of lies or the fact that you knew something was wrong and chose to benefit from it anyway. "You're not a child anymore. You made choices." He asked if there was any way we could rebuild our relationship, and I told him the truth, maybe someday, but not anytime soon. Trust, once broken this completely, doesn't just get glued back together with apologies and good intentions. With my financial security established, I was able to completely transform my business. I expanded my marketing consultancy, hired 2 employees, and moved into a beautiful office space downtown. More importantly, I started a nonprofit foundation focused on helping adopted adults access their records and understand their rights. Isabella and I co-founded it together, and we've already helped 12 other people discover hidden inheritances or reconnect with biological families. The irony isn't lost on me that my adoptive parents' betrayal led me to my real calling. I never would have known how many other people face similar situations if I hadn't gone through this myself. Every person we help feels like another small victory against the kind of deception and manipulation I experienced. I also started dating again, something I'd put on hold while building my business. There's something incredibly freeing about knowing exactly who you are and where you come from. I'm not the anxious, people-pleasing woman who used to bend over backward trying to earn love from people who were lying to my face. I'm confident, secure, and I know my worth, literally and figuratively. The most satisfying moment came last month when I ran into Patricia at the grocery store. She looked older, more worn down, and when she saw me, she actually tried to hide behind a display of cereal boxes. But I walked right up to her with a genuine smile. "Hi, Patricia," I said pleasantly. "How are you doing?" She stammered some response about being fine, clearly expecting me to be angry or vindictive. Instead, I told her about my nonprofit, about how well my business was doing, about my new relationship with Isabella and the extended family. "I'm really happy," I said, and I meant it. Everything worked out exactly the way it was supposed to. The look on her face was priceless, part confusion, part regret, part realization that their attempts to diminish me had actually freed me to become the person I was always meant to be. As I'm finishing this story, I'm sitting in my new house, a beautiful Victorian that I bought with my inheritance money, preparing for Easter dinner. Isabella is flying in from Chicago, along with 2 of my cousins and their kids. We're starting our own traditions now, ones based on honesty and genuine love instead of obligation and manipulation. Sometimes people ask me if I regret confronting the Hendersons so aggressively, if I think I should have tried to work things out more quietly. My answer is always the same: they had 28 years to tell me the truth, and they chose deception every single time. They didn't deserve my patience or my willingness to protect their reputation. They earned every bit of the consequences they faced. The best revenge really is living well, but sometimes living well requires making sure the people who wronged you face appropriate consequences for their actions. I got my money back, I found my real family, and I built a life that's authentically mine. The people who lied to me and stole from me lost their reputation, their standing in the community, and any claim to moral authority they thought they had. That's not revenge, that's justice. And it tastes even sweeter than I imagined. So here's my question for all of you watching: have you ever discovered that your family was hiding something major from you? How did you handle finding out the truth? And do you think I was too harsh in how I dealt with the Hendersons, or did they get exactly what they deserved? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. I read every single one, and I love hearing your stories about family drama and justice being served. If this story resonated with you, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe for more real-life drama stories where karma finally catches up with the people who think they can get away with anything. Share this with anyone who's ever felt like the outsider in their own family. Sometimes the people who make us feel like we don't belong are the ones who don't deserve us in the first place. Thank you for listening to my story, and remember, the truth always comes out eventually, and when it does, make sure you're ready to fight for what's rightfully yours. Here's to family, the ones who choose to love us honestly, and the strength to walk away from the ones who don't. Until next time, keep standing up for yourselves, and never let anyone convince you that you deserve less than the whole truth.